Hello, I'm Nicole France, Vice President and Principal Analyst covering all things customer experience here at Constellation Research.
And I'm Doug Henshin, Principal Analyst covering Data to Decisions, and we're your co-anchors for Episode 7 of Constellation TV.
This is the enterprise technology show where Constellation's research team shares the latest news, trends, and features, really all the exciting stuff that has to do with the enterprise.
And joining us later in the show will be our colleagues Holger Mueller, Ray Wong, Diane Hinchcliffe, and Liz Miller.
We've got an exciting show for you, as always. First, Doug and I will run down the news that we consider interesting and important. And then Doug is going to share a Parallax point of view on a report written by our colleague Holger Mueller on the Universal Database. And that will be followed by Ray Wong in his Quark interview with one of our favorite Constellation guests, tech ethnographer and data design consultant Trisha Wong.
And our final segment, we're going to be decoding last week's Microsoft Ignite event with help from Diane and Liz. So Nicole, let's dive right into the recent news. Now, immediately following the last episode of CRTV, we had ZOHO Day. This is a global company with SMB roots, but now they're scaling up into more enterprise customers. And they practice what they call sustainable capitalism. This is really like the antithesis of what you see in Silicon Valley. No acquisitions, no external funding, all organic growth. They've been around for more than 20 years now, and they've built this comprehensive, consistent platform spanning CRM, sales and marketing, productivity and collaboration. But one of these things is not quite like the others. ZOHO Analytics, 70% of its use is standalone, not tied to use of the ZOHO suite. Lots of great stuff, and they do a lot of embedded and OEM use of that platform. Very comprehensive, covers data management, data mart, BI, analytics, and the introduction at ZOHO Day was a new ZOHO Data Prep. So they're covering all the bases on data management and augmented capabilities, including natural language query. And I know they had a lot of stuff for you, Nicole.
They have all kinds of stuff. I mean, and just to say more than 20 years, it was in fact their 25th anniversary this year. So that was a big part of the party. And we did have a little virtual analyst party complete with Vijay Sundram, who is their chief strategy officer, donning the requisite cowboy hat since their new headquarters is in Austin, or has been for a couple of years. We were hoedown happy, I think, on the virtual analyst fun. What's interesting is that ZOHO, as you say, completely self-funded, has been profitable since the beginning, and has really focused on building out a very extensive suite of business applications, and really bills itself as the operating system for business, which is very much their intent. And a big part of that is really its CRM system and what has evolved into much more of a customer experience portfolio of capabilities. So certainly spanning marketing, but particularly sales and service, but with a whole lot of ties into a lot of the back office operations that we don't necessarily think of directly influencing customer experience, but things that absolutely do. So billing, a really big part of that. For example, part of the finance modules, all of that internal collaboration that you mentioned, critical to get people across the enterprise talking about what's happening. We've also, though, got connections into, as you say, a lot of different areas, including analytics, that are really about understanding all of the operations internally that allow the business to function. And that ultimately, whether you're talking about contacting and outreach to potential prospects, making a sale, doing business with them, keeping track of those transactions, or ultimately doing all the things that you have to do to fulfill on those orders and actually deliver what you've sold to or promised your customers. That's really what ZOHO has been working on for a number of years. Now, it's interesting to me, and to your point about the analytics stuff not being exactly like the other parts of the suite, there is very definitely a huge value proposition to running on ZOHO and to having the ability through ZOHO One, which is one of their licensing options that gives you access to just about everything that they offer, in being able to compose the different bits of business applications or functionality that you need in order to run your business the way that you would like to. What's interesting, though, is they certainly do have quite a number of customers who are very happy to buy parts of the ZOHO suite and to use that in conjunction with all the other applications.
Hey, they even have their answer to Zoom. Today I had a call on their answer to Zoom. So
yeah, absolutely, and
really,
it works reasonably well. Well, they've got new things that they're coming out with too. I mean, the other real distinction I would say, and I think we can probably summarize it well with this, they are very passionate about doing things their way, in a way that they consider to be ethical, to be in line with the kind of business that they want to run, but really the kind of community that they want to be a part of as well. And that extends very much to this issue of customer privacy, data privacy. And they're going to some very significant lengths, and I would consider them certainly the public outsider on this, as far as being absolutely clear that they will not be collecting customer data for marketing purposes, for resale marketing purposes. And that is a pretty big distinction in the market, and not something that you really see from any of the other big enterprise software vendors.
Good call on their part. Speaking of big enterprise software vendors in the limelight, this week I was pretty knocked out when I saw in the New York Times business section, Sunday business section, I'm one of those Luddites that still gets a Sunday paper. The robots are coming for Phil in accounting. A college degree and specialized training don't guarantee protection from automation. I'm hearing so much about automation this year. This article was really about automation areas like data processing, accounting reconciliation. I'm doing case studies on workflow automation. I did one with these security software company Malwarebytes and Workato. There's going to be an announcement this week from Boomi on their workflow product. So that's something to watch out for this year. Automation is on the rise, and to my mind, it's about eliminating this mind-numbing manual work. I'm not one of those to be too quaky about eliminating jobs. I think this is eliminating drudgery and bringing people to do more interesting stuff.
I totally agree with you on that. The other thing I'd add on the workflow side is, it's really fascinating, because I think what we have seen over the last year is a very clear illustration of the fact that a lot of the stuff that we thought was processed, that we thought was incorporated into our business systems, was actually a byproduct of people who could walk down the hall and talk to each other to get stuff done. And without that, I think what a whole lot of businesses have discovered in a variety of different ways is we really do have to more explicitly and more intentionally design this into our systems and the way that they even communicate from one functional area to the next, with perhaps some human intervention, but as you say, less and less, because we do a better and better job of understanding what the process flow actually should be and designing the systems to do as much of that as possible. So fascinating stuff. And we see that everywhere from, configure, price, quote, to field service, to customer service. It is all over the place. Changing gears a little bit, there are a couple of really big news items, again, from the mainstream media, Doug, on some things that I think are going to have some potentially very important influences on the technology sector. So one is Tim Wu, who is the author of a book called The Curse of Bigness, which is all about antitrust in the new Gilded Age, being appointed to the National Economic Council. And he really is the antitrust guy. So new in role, this was just announced very recently at the beginning of March. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, because he is definitely going to be taking up the baton on big tech.
Yeah, previously known for his stance in favor of prior administration favoring net neutrality. We'll see how hard he pushes on antitrust. The Elizabeth Warrens of this world would be all for it. Even Amy Klobuchar was touting this pick, and she's touting antitrust legislation and overhaul. We're also seeing bipartisan support, but politicians only seem to be polarizing things, and we'll see if they get anything done.
Yeah. In related news, there are a couple of other things that I think are worth noting too. One is Reddit hiring a CFO for the first time, which is really all about prepping for a potential IPO. Now, what's interesting to me and kind of connected to a lot of the potential antitrust or anti-monopoly legislation that might come in, or enforcement, let's say, of legislation, particularly among social media companies, is Reddit, by contrast, has recently moved into doing much more advertising, video content as well, but they've managed to do it in a way that seems to be pretty well received by its very large audience, and also is still, I think, the shining example of how to moderate content in a way that has been quite a distinction from a lot of the really big issues we've seen with other social media platforms. So that's a big one. Last one I'm going to say, for all of us in the tech sector, I know we've all been hearing more and more about SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies. What's interesting to me is really over the last couple of weeks, what we've started to see is the tenor of the coverage around SPACs turn from, hey, this is interesting, to something that is not quite so positive anymore. So all of this matters because all of this influences what a lot of different technology companies are thinking about, the way they're planning, and the way that investors are putting their money where their big ideas are. So I know, Doug, we've got one more big topic that we're going to touch on in a little more depth in a later segment in this broadcast today, right?
Yes, that's MS Ignite, but let's cue to the next session here.
Oh, yes, that's right. We're doing something a little different this time. As constellation analysts, we write a whole bunch of work, we write up our research into papers, and we often will ask a colleague who has a point of view on that subject matter, but perhaps a distinct point of view from what we as authors have, to write a parallax. So we're going to hear from Holger on his latest paper around the universal database. But Doug, you're going to present a parallax view, a different angle, a different perspective on the same topic to what Holger's written about.
Hello everybody, it's Holger Müller here together with my colleague Doug Henshin, talking about something close and near to our hearts, the big debate of universal versus specialized, or suite of specialized databases. Welcome, Doug.
Welcome, Holger. Great to be here. As part of our research process, one thing we do is, we spend weeks, sometimes months, writing a report, and then we want to bounce it off our colleagues. So we ask them to do what's called a parallax, which is, basically offering a different viewpoint. A parallax definition is a difference in apparent direction from two different viewpoints. So the two different viewpoints is the emphasis here.
Exactly, because to a quick reminder, we're constellation because the analysts are the stars, and different stars shine from a different way. So I'm very happy for Doug contributing a parallax to this best practice report. And best practice reports are about, like, what should CXOs do with technology, right? What to use. And one of the many questions I get, and this is why I write reports and best practice, if I get the same question very often, then I just write a report about and tell people read the report first, and then you can go more in depth, right? And the big discussion is the universal database, as I call it, the database which does everything in one thing, versus the specialized point database. But I think we don't have to call it a point database because we know that's a lot of things. But there's a new category of vendors emerging, which is a suite of specialized databases which come together, right? So it's a classic suite versus best of breed discussion as part of that. And what are the pros and cons between?
Well, Holger, one of my first comments in my parallax was, you gave some examples of suites of products, and you cited, AWS and its suite of different database services. And then you cited product suite, Microsoft 365, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, unified roadmap. I would point out that way back when the Office suite got started, it was indeed separate products, that it was a suite of products that
I remember, absolutely right, yeah.
Product suite. But one of my comments in my parallax was, I think of a database really as a product with a bunch of features. I think that's what you're talking about with Oracle and other prominent databases that have added support for JSON, added support for spatial query, added support for graph analysis.
Yeah, the way how I see it, if there's a single product being offered by maybe somebody else in the market, it's a separate product, right? So you can conglomerate them together in a productivity suite, or in an ERP suite, and a CRM suite, or into a database product, right? We don't call it suite about it. In Universal, I'm trying to say, Oracle calls it the converged database as an example. I don't think converged is great because there's so much converged hardware which doesn't work anymore. So it's a bad name. But Universal in the sense that theoretically, practically, the value proposition of Oracle 21c now, the latest version, is this is the one database you need to have. You don't need to do other ones. You don't need other ones. That's the promise of the suites in general, in this case, on the Oracle side.
Well, one of your examples, I think in your research, you acknowledged that there are differences and advantages for different types of products here. The best of breed, and you talked advantages about a best of breed product versus what you're calling a universal product. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. What did you see as the advantages of the best of breed versus the suite? Because that's where I had another perspective on Parallax.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thanks for asking the question, right? The best of breed will always be more functional, faster to market, offer more capabilities than the suite will do. That's the nature of the best of breed versus suite business, right? And the most prominent proponent in the database space obviously is Amazon with their suite of specialized databases here, right? And that keeps the suite vendors honest and keeps them working and providing that capabilities missing or providing more depth to it. So it's the pro and con taken between the two, because if I end up with separate products, let's forget about the suite of specialized database for a moment, I have an integration problem to show that, right? Because companies want to get their data together for your area, BI, analytics, data to decisions at some point, make something, or for transactional purpose, whatever it is, right? It's no longer still standalone thing. So the integration cost versus the integration benefit is really what makes a difference in my view.
Well, but where I kind of challenged you a bit in my Parallax was, I think you had the #1 advantage of the best of breed being speed to market. And I really didn't quite get that. They're the first to offer this capability, because to me, the real advantage of best of breed is fit for use case. It tackles that job the best. It has the broadest and deepest capability for that use case.
Correct, absolutely right. That's what defines best of breed. But typically, it's also often the startup who has the idea to build something crazy or something which is at the edge, where the traditional players, our customers, are not even asking about this. This will never run. This will never be a thing, right? As an example. So this is why I'm saying usually there's a speed to market approach too, because it's easier also. Even if I'm a suite level vendor, right? We see this interesting thing on some database vendors that call kind of like hybrid. Let's talk by IBM as an example, right? Or Microsoft, who have their traditional historical universal database with SQL Server DB2, but then they have specialty offerings right now, right? And they have a mixed hybrid approach if you want to do that, right? Why did they do this? They might have acquired them, in IBM's case, in many cases, or it's faster for product developers to just build those single databases, then bring it all into the overall long release cycle, heavy testing. Customers don't want the new feature. No, I don't want that graph thing in there. I don't need this, right? You just stabilize my database, right? From the use case and so on. So that's all interesting discussions which happen and determine the dynamics there.
In my view, though, it's really these products that have added JSON support, added graph analysis. It's just kind of checking a box to me. You could say that it gives you good enough for government work sort of functionality, but to my mind, if you want a best of breed database, Oracle is best of breed SQL relational database. MongoDB is a best of breed document database. Neo.js4, Tiger Graph, other examples of graph databases. You would choose, if that's your need, that's what you would choose. And despite graph support in a relational database, I would still maintain that graph is best if data is represented in many-to-many relationships, if there's complex relationships between that data and they change often, and if they're highly unstructured. A SQL database is just going to be hard to change and very hierarchical oriented. And a document database, you fast, flexible development, that's not something you do with SQL.
That's a very fair comment, Doug. Absolutely right. So every company has different depth of needs for this. And logically, naturally, if you have the very advanced needs, you will gravitate towards the best of breed vendor. There's no question about this in my view. The question is, does every company have those demands on that part, right? One recent thing that, for instance, going back to the prototype of universal database of Oracle, right? They launched the immutable table and the blockchain table, right? Will you be able to run blockchain applications on Oracle? No, probably not a good idea. if I just need one immutable table for certain use cases, yeah, that could be an interesting solution potentially. But every answer, you're absolutely right, in this space needs to be individually taken by every company, because every company is different, every situation is different. But the cost of integration versus not having the latest grading cutting functionality, that's the trade-off CIOs, CTOs, heads of product need to take.
Well, so I think this is a good example. You're going to see Holger's report very soon, or it's out, I guess, and it includes my Parallax. So you get to see his research, and you get to see a slightly different perspective. So Holger, what's the next report you're going to send me that you might want my Parallax, and I'll share my plans, and I'm sure you'll want to get your Parallax in on my new report.
Depends on what it is. I actually, the next thing coming from the big data idea is going to be, I've done the 3 layers, right? So 5 layers of infinite computing. I've done infinite insights, right? But that was the one. So I'm not sure if it's going to be infinite compute or infinite connections. Infinite connections is going to be very easy, relatively easy. Infinite compute a little more harder, but definitely want to work on the infinite computing side. How about you?
And mine is going to be a market overview, so big, sweeping, comprehensive analysis of analytic databases and platforms. So things like Microsoft Synapse, Databricks, even Cloudera, Teradata, Vertica, and what we're seeing now from the clouds in terms of analytic options from AWS and Google, and Synapse is Microsoft's option. So I'm sure you're going to want to do a Parallax on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we do them market overviews, but definitely we'll take a look and happy to provide feedback. This was great, Doug. I really appreciate you doing the Parallax from your perspective. Other people, 4 eyes see more than 2, so I always appreciate that. It's always a fun conversation. Hope you enjoyed it as well.
All right. Have a great week.
Oh my God, we're live with Trisha Wong. As you know, she's my other sister.
Hey, Ray, my brother, Ray Wong.
So cool. Hey, we're going to be talking about something that's hit us all at once. You call it spatial collapse. Let's start by figuring out what that is and why our old data is irrelevant.
Yes. So I think that what's happened right now is, I want to give a language to what we're all experiencing, is that we're going through a massive spatial collapse. And what I want you to do, take 3 pieces of paper out, or you just do the exercise with me, is just take 3 different colors of piece of paper. And this is first space. So this is like where we actually spend most of our time, which is at home. And then this is second space. This is work. And then was work going in. And this is third space, which is the places you go to hang out for like community, for creativity. So first place is home, second place is work, and then third place is like the bar, the airplane, things where you kind of have like public space where serendipity happens, where you meet strangers. What's happened during the pandemic is that all 3 of these spaces, our mental model for first, second, and third place I'm like, my screen is like coming in and out, but have all come together on top of each other and have literally collapsed. And if you just crumple these spaces together, and then we just rip it up, it's like all our entire social concept, like that's in our minds of how we separate out space, has completely collapsed. And if you see that, this is our experience right now, the pandemic. So things that, that kept these spaces separate have now all smushed together. And that is the collective experience of what this pandemic is doing to all of us. And what that means is that everything that we know of has changed. All of that data that you thought you understood about your customers, of how they acted pre-pandemic, like for example, am I wearing all clothes? Probably not. I'm likely wearing sweats, and that means that like for shopping, for retail, people are spending more money on tops that, for actual workwear, but the kind of other money that they're spending on for sweats, it's like for sweats and other kind of wear, right? And we couldn't have predicted this pre-pandemic. And there are so many things that have changed, and also very negative things too. We've lost about 10 years in all the gender advancements because of the pandemic. But I think there's also really lots of great stuff, because the past times we've had spatial collapses, which I would say is like around the last one we've had was around the 70s and the 60s, around when we had an urban spatial collapse, when we had pretty much cities were economically blighted and there was white flight. But what happened? What grew out of the 80s and 70s, pretty much out of the 90s, Ray? You know this, the answer is hip hop. Hip hop came out of spatial collapse because all of a sudden you had people who were, left behind in cities because there was white flight, but they spent their time outside of buildings because they didn't want to spend their time inside these terrible, buildings that weren't being attended to by cities. And we had hip hop come out, and that's changed entire culture. I think something new is going to totally come out of this period right now. We don't know what it is exactly yet because we don't have the quantitative data to tell us, but we do have qualitative data. And I believe that the companies who are on top of spotting that emergent insight, those like emergent cultural changes, which will come in the form of qualitative thick data insights, not quantitative data, those are the companies that are going to know how to capture and get that unfair advantage. And once you know what that qualitative thick data insight is, then you're going to be able to start conjecturing, well, what kind of quant data should we be collecting to really make sure we scale out our insights? And those are the companies that I think are going to win.
So real quick, our models are totally effed. We don't have the right information. First of all, we're not even measuring the right things. And a new trend is emerging while this is all happening.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. And all of us are experiencing the spatial collapse right now. We are, I mean, look at this. We were all supposed to be hanging out together, you know, over the fire in a conference room. And here we are talking online. I mean, this is a perfect example of spatial collapse. All these things that wouldn't have happened pre-pandemic are happening right now. And what we have to see is, how do we find out what's going to come out of this? How do we find those thick data insights?
Now, you are personally working on example spatial collapse. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. This is like nothing to do with my consulting corporate life. But aside from all day working with data scientists and CEOs, telling them that they need to start investing in thick data because all of their analytics that they invested in is lacking those qualitative data. By night, I work on a nonprofit that I accidentally co-founded with a bunch of friends in the beginning of the pandemic, which is called Last Mile. And what we do is we make sure that the most vulnerable communities are being taken care of during the pandemic. Our first project was giving out PPE to those most vulnerable healthcare workers. We gave out about almost, I would say, 400,000 of PPE around the country. We're still doing that. But our second program is called COVID Straight Talk. And it's a whole entire holistic public health education program trying to help people understand what happens when COVID is an airborne virus. And our whole entire goal is to tell you, you need to get MAD and stay safe. MAD, which is mask for M, A, air, and D is distance. If you go to our website, COVID Straight Talk, it gives you all of these examples of what you're supposed to do to actually stay safe. And here's the thing, take this survey, because what we're doing is we're trying to collect, because of our thick data insight, that we actually have to keep people safe help people understand how to keep their indoor air safe. We have a lot of great hacks on here that you can do, like literally bring in some fans. But what we're saying is take the survey, because we're collecting quant data to give you personalized tips on what to do. So most people here listening probably aren't working at home, but pass it to your loved ones who are working, like teachers.
No, but places have opened up. There are institutions that have opened up. But the most important thing is, we were never collecting this data, and you're finally collecting it. This is your part of spatial collapse, right?
Yeah, this is an example of spatial collapse, and one of our partners, which actually owns World Trade Center building, World Trade Center Silverstein properties, they're working with us to push this out. So we have all of these partners who are like, we need this data right now, because we never knew we had to collect it, which is how are workers being treated at their work, how are employers taking care of their workers and their air safety.
All right, Trisha, we got to go. You're going to be around the event, always insightful, and more importantly, always purposeful. Thanks a thought.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
So the other big news this week is the load of announcements that we got over the last week or so from Microsoft through Microsoft Ignite. And really, we're talking about a big book of stuff. And that is literally what they sent out to press and journalists and the analysts as well. Diane, do you want to kick us off? You've got in your purview a whole bunch of the stuff that Microsoft was really focused on with this release. So what's new? What's your take for Microsoft Ignite? Pick apart some of those great big announcements for us.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and Nicole, you know that my interest really is in, what are the issues when it comes to the CIO and what announcements came out on the future of work. And so I've filtered through the many announcements that came out. And the ones that really stood out for me was the Azure cognitive search capabilities. Enterprise search is one of the biggest challenges still today in the workplace. You can't find things. Enterprise search doesn't work. It's very limited. I just did another survey of digital workplace teams, and 0% reported that they have effective enterprise search. That is astonishing. So there's reason to believe that this is not keyword search. This is using AI to really get into the capabilities. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm going to be tracking that quite closely to see if that's going to start to crack that still long-standing challenge in digital workplace. Also saw very interesting things in mission critical cloud. You can now set in Azure SLAs that you couldn't before. You're really limited by what Microsoft lays down in their default contracts, and it's very hard to change that. And that's been one of the big complaints of CIOs. Now Microsoft is providing some knobs for mission critical computing with SLAs you can set yourself, and they adjust your pricing, and then you can have a pre-reserved capacity that's ready to ramp up quickly and hopefully a cost-effective way. I haven't looked at the pricing, but these are the knobs that CIOs really want to be able to say, I need to be able to have a little more tailoring and contouring of my abilities, availability and fault tolerance and so on. I also really like the announcement about putting ML anywhere, the Azure machine learning. It can be put, in multi-cloud. It can be put in your data center now. It can be put anywhere on the edge and edge devices, and you have one control plane through Arc, which I thought was really nice. That's what people are increasingly want. They want to put the machine learning processing where it makes the most sense, not have to do everything over the network.
Yeah.
In terms of maturity, that was really good. Vertical cloud integration. They've added to the healthcare cloud that they've created with now telecom, retail, and nonprofit. And if you're in those areas, they've done a lot of work for you now to put best practices for those industries in Azure cloud configuration, so you can start from there if you're trying to get on board. And for nonprofits in particular that have very small IT staffs, that's going to be a big bang, or small retail. And then finally, Microsoft Teams got more features. What a surprise! They got the new Connect capability is coming that will allow you to collaborate with customers now and partners in a more structured way on collaborative documents. This was much requested and much needed, and it was good. They also went into Viva, which is the new employee experience centered around Teams. I think it's really good. I think it's a bit expensive. I worry about the monoculture it's going to create an employee experience, but good stuff there. And then finally, Microsoft has created another programming language for low code that looks like Excel functions called PowerFX. And I think that's actually really going to help take all that low coding skill that we have in Excel and be able to move that into real application development inside Microsoft Power Apps. So those are the things that really got me excited. And so
lots there, lots to unpack. I think there is a theme here, which is about making this stuff more of an integrated way of working and a much more sort of default part of all of the tools that many of us access every day within various aspects of the Microsoft suite. Liz, there was a lot of stuff, and picking up on a few of the things that Dion talked about, things like low code, for example, but there were some pretty big announcements, especially in marketing as well, right?
Yeah. Marketing got a nice ad, although I would argue it wasn't really marketing's exclusive ad, right? So Dynamics now has a journey orchestration, which is really providing marketing, sales, and I would actually argue service as well, some really interesting capabilities and ability to tie all of their points of service, points of touch, and communication with the customer together. They're applying some really nice machine learning and some really nice capabilities so that you can have these really smart decisions moving forward in which communications you start to automate. It's great because marketing and sales have kind of been communicating outbound in these weird silos. You've got marketing automation over here that's like the fancy email butler, and they've got a great solution in Dynamics for that. But oftentimes sales is setting up communications in its own track. With journey orchestration, it's bringing all of that together. And so it's this really unified front. So you're really looking at a customer first journey rather than a silo first or a channel first journey. I would say the other thing that really stood out with me, and it ties into a lot of what Diane was saying, is in every single one of these announcements, whether you looked at something like Viva or whether you looked at something like journey orchestration, security and data governance is definitely taking center stage at Microsoft. You even saw with the Viva announcement, it was, that yes, it's powered by Teams, but it's also secured by Microsoft Security. So you're looking at everything from endpoints to network security across a really impressive portfolio that Microsoft is beginning to stitch together across their security and their data governance solutions to really have that be the underpinning of how everything moves forward. So some really big announcements, but I think a lot of it is customer first, especially with journey orchestration.
Yep, and a lot about tailoring those tools for the people using them. Yeah. Doug, there's obviously a lot in here, and we've already touched on some of the incorporation of machine learning in various ways. What for you really stood out in the plethora of announcements around?
Well, that theme of democratization, Diane touched on it with some of the things they've done with Teams, but Azure Power Platform Lots of developments in workflow and automation. They're putting the Power Automate desktop free on every Windows machine. That's an RPA client with Excel type of low-code coding. They're adding governance and security features for Power workflows and Power accessed data. Very important to make these automations secure, reliable, and well-governed. A lot of announcements around Azure Synapse, a lot of them around Cosmos DB, but I was more excited by the announcement that they're going to have Azure Synapse Pathway, which is a way to migrate data from Teradata, from Netezza, from SQL Server, and they hope Azure Redshift or AWS Redshift, Snowflake, and Google BigQuery might be harder on that front. And then Azure Purview, which is their next-gen metadata management solution, kind of going beyond that Azure Data Catalog to address hybrid and multi-cloud. My take, though, is that the policy management and enforcement is a work in progress. So we'll see where that comes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I think there were a couple of things in there that are actually a lot more high impact than necessarily came through because of all of the announcements that were made. Like, and I think you touched on this, Doug, inclusion of Power Automate with Windows. I mean, they're really trying to push very hard here to make sure that the ability to automate is something that is accessible to everyone who uses Microsoft. And that is a really big deal. I mean, there are huge implications here that I think are very positive, particularly when you start looking at some of the educational requirements that it's going to take to really train a workforce that knows how to operate and is instantly comfortable using these kinds of tools. So for me, that was one of those areas that really didn't get the kind of high profile attention that I think it probably should, because that is actually huge. Now, there are a lot of aspects here that for me really come down to trying to simplify the way that these tools are incorporated into everything from helping developers and data scientists to do their jobs better and to helping frontline workers make better decisions more easily and more effectively and more naturally, if you like, because they have access to what they need. I do have a few concerns. Viva is probably the biggest one for me because I'll be honest, it seems like a solution looking for a problem in a whole lot of ways. A lot of the reporting that it provides to employees is very well intentioned, but I still question whether those nudges are actually nudging people toward the most important things that they really need to be focusing on for the priorities of their team or their organization. That's still a big disconnect in my book. But
I'll jump in there and play devil's advocate and say that what I'm hearing now, a year into all of this, is that with workers being so remote for a year that they're losing the connection with the mothership. And we need to do proactive things to draw workers in, give them information, connect them better together. And what's nice is, Viva is actually really a repackaging of a bunch of other Microsoft solutions that weren't as well integrated before.
Yeah.
One of them is talent analytics. So we're actually going to get data to see if Viva works. You'll be able to take your talent analytics portfolio and actually see, hey, am I seeing kind of changes in my workforce? I think that's what Microsoft's real challenge is going to be. If Viva just looks nice but isn't delivering value, customers are going to see it pretty quickly, and they're going to want to cut the cord because that it is expensive. But I think that a few things I've seen indicate that they're going to get some value out of it.
Yeah, we'll see, because I think part of the issue is it's one thing to have those statistics at a high level. It's another thing to really understand what individual teams need. And I just don't see the level of granularity and the direction coming from Microsoft yet. Could it happen? Absolutely. It's going to take a whole lot of close collaboration with their customers in order to figure out what that actually looks like. So that's
what I'm actually hearing on the ground for digital workplace teams is that they're looking at things like digital adoption platforms who have been doing this now for 2 or 3 years with really detailed data, and they can come back and say, we know what kind of gains we can give your workers. They're much higher on the maturity curve, and they're cheaper in many cases. So that's what I'm also seeing is Viva is actually making people really look around and go, what else can I do that has more maturity and maybe is more affordable?
Well, and we're coming back to this whole idea of contextual learning and contextual information. And I'm with you when it comes to things like cognitive search. I think we all touched on that to some degree. That's one of those areas that to me is actually going to have a huge impact as well. Getting to what you need, even if you aren't necessarily using the right language to find it, that's as important in the work context as it is on whatever you might be searching on the internet. So,
and it's getting to change.
Yeah.
Right. It's getting to the point of change. It's great that I know what I did, but what do I actually need to do to make the business better, to make me better? it feels like that's often the missing gap. And I think in the journey orchestration bit, I think they're actually looking to try to piece in some of those gaps of, okay, here's why this customer's interest fell off, and how do we actually start to make changes so that that journey continues the way we expect it to, but more importantly, how the customer wants it to. So some nice gaps happening. I hope they see that through across Viva.
I think so too. Very, very promising, I think, is how I would summarize what we're talking about here. Some great moves. Still plenty of work to be done. Well, I guess that's about a wrap. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at ConstellationR and on LinkedIn. And you can also follow the hashtag CRTV. Episodes for Constellation TV come out twice monthly on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific.
So that makes the next show, episode 8, March 24. Be there for the Miller-Mueller Show.
The Miller-Mueller Show?
The Mueller-Miller Show. Always be well. Take care. It's 6 o'clock in the East. I have to make dinner. Let's get on with this.
All right.
That's my blooper.
Doug's got to go cook. Come on, people.
I know. So anybody get a burning desire to kick us off here? Anybody care? Shall I just pick?
I just want to know what Doug's making. That's all I care about at this point.
I'm making chicken sandwiches on a panini machine.
Nice.
I got
Isn't
tri-tip
that
if you want to come
George
over,
Foreman
Liz. If you're all vaccinated, you guys are more than welcome to come over. Get tri-tip and other fun stuff.
I still got to use the Ray drive-through service where he just chucks tri-tip into the window of my car.
Let me know.
Hey, come on. Doug's making paninis. Get out of here, Ray.
All right.
And don't talk about universal print. That is so boring. No, I'm kidding.
Why wouldn't we want to talk about universal print? I mean, send to any printer, Ray.
Oh my.
Any printer in the world, yeah. It's a cloud-based printer router.
But you can get a device for that, right? There's no point.
Print is dead. Print is dead, damn it. Can't
Somebody,
printer because it's dead.
And catch that next show, episode 8, on March 24th with our friends Holger and Liz.
The Mulger?
The Mueller-Mueller.
The Miller-Mueller Show? The Mulger-Mueller?
The Mueller-Mueller.
The Miller-Mueller Show?
The Miller-Mueller Show. So always a pleasure. Be well and take care.